basically, I was coming up with, I was just kind of diving into it, and I realized the why do you believe what you believe is predicated on what do you believe. And so that was personally between you and I, something I've always either struggled with or had put too much pressure on myself about that question in general.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it stresses me out, I guess. Kind of really defining it, but I had to go through this process, and then there were some other stories, and then I realized, well, it's got to be in context of something. You don't just you can have principles and you can have kind of beliefs, but they don't exist until they come into question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I know COVID is probably one where I can get more specific on of what do I believe about the current worldview of COVID, and so I had thoughts on that. But this first stuff was kind of really interesting because you gave me these three. I'm just going to go over these questions real quick and then stop talking. Because these are excellent questions. And I did, what do you believe that your friends don't? And I didn't say peer group, your friends, keep it real.
Yeah.
You know? And then ignorance inspires confidence more than knowledge. I think I misquoted that, but that's general the gist. And I did learn about this. There's I think it's the Dunning-Kruger effect or something. And then when I was trying to break down of belief, it would be more interesting to take a specific thing, right? Like this is the non-specific. So how do I generally think about my own beliefs? Like, what are they? What do I approve of? Which is different. What do I support in some way? I was trying to tie it back to actual, not just what I think, but what do I do? What will I stand for? Again, you never know until it happens, but what do you think about yourself? And then what do I believe about specific things? Which get more into trying to answer the question. And then why do I believe that? What do I want to believe in is also another, I think, a neat angle to understand it. And this is all due to worldview versus belief. A lot of the stuff in my mind it comes down to identity. A lot of this stuff. It's really these are questions of identity. And then I did want to go through some specific COVID stuff, but then I've got some real interesting stories about when I started believing certain things. And I've got three big things in grade school. So I want to get to that story because it's fun.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask you some more general questions about what we're doing in this process. And what I would like to do is come up with a product of short video, documents, whatever the hell it is, that can be presented to other people to elicit from them the reasons behind their beliefs. And what I'm driving at is I hear people arguing, and to your point, getting specific about things like COVID. I hear people use the word belief, that, I don't believe or I do believe something. And I want to step back from that, and I want it in as nonpartisan and non-threatening way as possible. I want to engage them in exploring what causes them to believe or accept something and what might cause them to no longer believe that, because, I've got a lot of stuff I want to say here, but in the end, what I'd like to come up with is an introduction that poses a thoughtful question to someone to say, ask yourself not only what you believe. I mean, that's asking somebody what they believe gets very specific, and it usually cuts it off. Somebody says, what do I believe? Well, I believe this. And then if you challenge them, they say, well, you can't challenge me because that's what I believe. Right. I want to get ahead of that and say, I'm not interested so much in what you believe. I'm more interested in why you believe. That what is it that causes you to accept something as a truth? Now, I did a little bit of background on this, and we had this discussion yesterday in our group. It went pretty well, but I guess the one thing that I want to hone in on, and I sent you an email. You got an email with all those links and so forth.
Did I?
Well, I just sent you one this morning. So at any rate, let me focus on.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, what it comes down to is the terms occurring and dispositional, occurrent and dispositional, and I've this runs very, very deep. There's a whole reference in there to a treatise on the philosophical basis, kind of the epistemological view of what these various things are. But essentially, let me just read part of it. A belief is an attitude that something is the case, or that some proposition about the world is true. In epistemology, philosophers use the term belief to refer to attitudes about the world, which can be either true or false. To believe something is to take it to be true. For instance, to believe that snow is white is comparable to accepting the truth of the proposition, snow is white. However, holding a belief does not require active introspection. For example, few people carefully consider whether or not the sun will rise tomorrow, simply assuming that it will. Moreover, beliefs do not need to be occurrent, that is, a person actively thinking snow is white, but can instead be dispositional. If a person asked about the color of snow, would assert snow's white. So this idea of something being occurrent, which is actually occurring, observable, not potential or hypothetical, as opposed to dispositional, which is, I guess the best example I've seen is if you say someone is a cigarette smoker and you don't witness them smoking a cigarette, that is a dispositional judgment. If you see them smoking a cigarette, they are a cigarette smoker. Now, if I'm not by disposition a cigarette smoker, I pick one up and light it and breathe in the smoke, I am a cigarette smoker currently, but I'm not dispositionally.
Right.
Okay, so that distinction is what I'd like to bring to the fore. It's, the government is corrupt. Well, that's a dispositional statement for most people. Have you actually observed personally government corruption in your own life? You've witnessed a government person who you could prove was corrupt. Well, that would be an occurrent example. And what we find ourselves in is more a plethora of dispositional positions that climate change is fake or climate change is real. Well, on either case of that, how much of that is your predisposition to accepting climate change, and how much of it is your personal observation of climate change? And so when I look at some of the things that you were asking here, or that you're posing, what do I approve of? What do I stand for? What do I believe in? The things that are dispositional would be things like, I believe in equal treatment of races, okay? I believe in that. Well, how much of that is occurrent for me? Where do I demonstrate that? Or how does it become personal for me, as opposed to, a vague idea, a non-committal idea? Oh yeah, I'm for justice and truth and all those things. And this leads me into, there's a lot of other things there. I don't want to go on and on with it, but I would like to have something that could get people's wheels turning in a way other than you say it's this way and I'm going to confront you and I say it this way. And so we both go to our camps and we don't talk to each other anymore. I want it to be more about, think about how you do this. Think about what's going on with you. And I would say this equally applies to people on the left and the right.
Well, it applies to everybody.
Yeah.
Now, this was interesting where part of my brain is going, I'm using the terms life view versus world view. So this is an interesting phenomenon that I don't want to sweep under the rug. This idea, and kind of something that triggered me was like, if you believe the government is corrupt, what corruption have you personally witnessed? Where does me having a trusted source witness something, where does that fall in?
Mm-hmm.
It's not me. Like if you're talking about what I actually experience, like it's very, I have to think extraordinarily small.
Yeah.
But we're presented with these worldview items and with these bigger items. So I have to be able to, maybe I need to think about it differently or have some better tools, but I need to be able to take in other people's personal accounts. So when an investigative journalist witnesses on my behalf,
right,
what do I do with that information?
Yeah. Well, I may have been watching Law and Order too much during the pandemic, but the thing that comes to mind for me is the attorney asks, was the defendant angry? They asked the witness, was the defendant angry? And the witness says, yes, he was angry. Okay. As opposed to, did someone tell you that the defendant was angry? Which would be hearsay. Yeah, they told me he was angry, but I didn't make a personal observation of the anger. I can tell you that this person said they were angry. So you get these layers of, well, I don't know it, but I know this person said it. And, it becomes sort of like Chicken Little, the acorn falls on the head and the sky is falling. Well, you keep accelerating these things. So, what you observe personally and what your trusted source observes can both be a current. Okay. So if you have a trusted source, if you tell me that you got up at 8 o'clock this morning, I believe you got up at 8 o'clock this morning. I have no reason to doubt that. Okay. So,
you do.
Yeah. Well, if I said, if someone asked me, you tell me you got up at whatever time, and someone asked me, what time did he get up? I will say, he said he got up at 8 o'clock. All right. And that's fine. If I take it a step further, then it becomes hearsay. Well, for most people, it's identifying that trusted source and either placing too much or too little confidence in that source. So whoever, George Will comes on TV and says something, do I accept what he says face value, or do I reject what he says right away? So I've
been coming up with a problem with that of trusted sources, where it's really easy to identify in other people and their trusted sources that I don't trust, how they don't question the thing or how they may have agreed in one thing, so they just kind of keep going. And there's that constant flag of, okay, I've got a few people who I really enjoy listening to, who they're trusted sources. I'll just leave it at that. But I don't want to unflailingly have blind faith in everything, all that stuff. We keep talking about Tulsi Gabbard. It was the same kind of thing of like, there are certain things that I really like, but I can't let that blind me. When do I get blinded myself? When do I start acting like the people I criticize?
Yeah.
And so that's just a question I have in my head. It'd be interesting to know why that question's in my head. why is it there in the first place? But
Right.
it's something I have to keep working on. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah. Well, that if you take, let me take Rachel Maddow as an example. I think Rachel Maddow is a very smart person. I don't think she lies intentionally. However, I think sometimes she reports things that have not been properly verified. That she's not lying. I mean, if I tell you, you ask me if it's raining, and I say, yeah, it's raining here. Well, it was raining a little while ago, but I don't know if it's raining right now. I say it's raining. I'm not lying to you. I'm just telling you an untruth. It was my firm belief that it was raining, but it's not. Well, I think Rachel Maddow does this in many ways, where she takes information from a source that source has taken information from a source and from a source and from a source, and it filters up, and she is predisposed to believe what that source tells them. And so she reports it to me. And that's why I don't consider her to be a trusted source. Once you discover that someone, a journalist or whoever, is telling you things that they haven't personally verified, then they're no longer to be trusted. And I think that's by making this distinction between the predisposition and the occurrence, you can begin to articulate what the process is of going through discovering, the truth. And if you don't do that, then you fall victim, as you were saying, you fall victim to the same thing that you're accusing other people of doing. So what I'm interested in is not only for others, but for myself. Am I being thorough in my discernment there? That I remember all the President's Men, the story about Watergate and Woodward and Bernstein and so forth, and all of the trouble they went through to verify a statement that, they thought this was happening. They pretty much knew it happened. They believed it was happening, but they had to go through the process of getting verification. And sometimes it's very difficult to do that when you have uncooperative witnesses, but they went through that process. I don't believe Rachel Maddow does that. I don't think they do the due diligence of exploring the sources. I think they rely too much on predisposition. Makes sense?
It does. And I think that one of the ends that's really screaming at me is getting people to recall, when they questioned something or when things got skewed or something, like those specific moments when you believe when something changed, when you kind of saw something or realized something or felt something. So it's like, that's why I wanted to bring up the stories. I was trying to remember as far back, when did I start questioning certain things? And I know I can't remember when I'm youngest, so that's when all my family involvement and everything informed my life. And so, of course, we'll tell the thousands that are listening, I was brought up by teachers and artists and I had a whole spiel going now. But anyway, vibrant childhood. But I remember in grade school and high school when I had to employ that in the world. And high school was different because I just had a lot of opportunities to do different things and a lot of exploration. So that was very formative. But I was remembering in grade school, there was just a few things, because mostly it was just about getting through the day,
Right.
You're just a kid. But I remember ribbons and nuns is what I call it. Ribbons and nuns. So this was the first Iraq war. I was freshman in high school in '92. So the war buildup was right before that. That would have been in grade school. And I remember all the ribbons. They're tied on every tree and the ribbons everywhere.
Yellow ribbons, yeah.
And I felt a disconnect. I'm like, okay, from all I've heard, war's bad and we shouldn't do it. And there's this disconnect. It's like, okay, well, all these ribbons. I'm like, oh, war isn't bad. What's going on? And so it seemed like a disconnect of, okay, the concept of war is still way over here, even though it shouldn't. There was just this disconnect of people were not being what they said they would have been. You know, you're like, oh no, war is always bad. You should never do violence. Oh, there's violencing happening. What should we do? No, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, are you all full of shit? What the hell?
Thank you for your service, right? Thank you.
Yeah. I was like, I don't get this. Like, okay, you're all full of shit. Something's wrong. Like, this is a racket, and what? It's one of the first moments of like, why aren't we all out in the streets? It was one of those moments. Second moment was, I remember, so the war is a racket kind of thing, kind of seared in around that time. And I don't know if it was 8th grade or freshman year, but the question authority was seared in around that time, around 8th grade. I remember that because at the time, my big philosophical question was, is there a God or not? Because I'm in Catholic school and all this stuff. And only recently I learned there's two schools of thoughts. There's the God of love and the God of authority. And that's basically, are you looking for an authoritarian mechanism or an equity mechanism? What's your morality compass? And the God of love is about, fortunately, I was exposed to non-authoritarian stuff, so it was the God of love, and God doesn't need to be real, and God wasn't real, but it's the act of understanding love and how to be loving and like you do. And so that I had a lot of exposure to that from a lot of different sources. And only now I realized what was going on. So there was the God of love. And I remember in 8th grade, a group of us were in the gym with a kickball or something, and we were goofing around. And we ended up kicking it so hard and so high, it broke one of the lights in the ceiling. And it was one of those lights with the little cages over or whatever. It was like,
yeah.
We knew we weren't doing right, but it was innocent, okay? And yeah, we were wrong, but grain of salt, don't come down too hard on us. This nun who was running the school, I don't know what the run, it was at that school, I don't know if she was running it or not. I think she was. Anyway, so at that time, I'm like, okay, God's not real. This is but being a good person and figuring out love and stuff is real, and that's good, and that's why you should do it. So your little armor of I'm on God's side, you can't question God, is bullshit. So I'm not gonna stand for that one. 2, she was a woman, and I'm sure there was a lot of, I'm a guy, I'm not gonna listen to this woman kind of thing. I'm sure that happened. I don't know if it was the highest point of my mind. But then also, wasn't the one who kicked the ball. I was in the room. Yes, I was encouraging him. And also, I'm a kid. I'm going to try to not get in trouble. So all these things are swirling around. But my biggest thing was to not let this nun win. We're in the discussion, we're in the room, and I'm sitting there, and she's trying to get me in trouble or feel bad or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, technically she was right, but I didn't like her attitude. It's like, I'm not going to let this pull it over. And so this idea of adults are adults. I think that was the first time I realized adults are people too.
Yeah.
And people are full of shit, and people are inferior in every way. And like, we're all these things. And we're like, all right. It was one of the first senses of like, I'm right. Or maybe we're both right, but I'm at least somewhat right. You're going to bulldoze me. Okay. I'm stepping out of this one. And I'm not going to, it was this question authority moment kind of thing. And it goes back to the ribbons of like, okay, what is going on? Can't you think for yourself and feel for yourself? Why are you affected by everyone else? Mm-hmm. This kind of thing of like, at an early age, I realized I had this notion, and as I get older, it gets chipped away at, but it's this notion of everybody seems to be living wrong. Like, it shouldn't be this hard. Like, if you can think and feel this certain way, like, why are you not doing the right thing? Like, I don't understand. Yeah. So,
I think what you run into is the same thing I run into, which is I guess I would call it the Spock dilemma. You know, Spock is the character without emotion, but actually he's half human, and he experiences the emotion, but he doesn't. He at least tries not to let the emotional part of it dictate his actions. He wants the reason to prevail. And you confront people who allow emotion to run all over their reason. And I have two things that I want to, they're part of what I sent you, but for this presentation I made yesterday, I was trying to think of something that could relate, that guys could relate to, that would illustrate the point. And I went and got the lyrics to this old song. And I won't sing, I'll spare you singing the song, but it's, I believe for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows. I believe that somewhere in the darkest night, a candle glows. I believe for everyone that goes astray, someone will come to show the way. I believe above the storm, the smallest prayer will be heard. I believe that someone in the great somewhere hears every word. Every time I hear a newborn baby cry or touch a leaf or see the sky, then I know why I believe. Now, I heard that song 1,000 times when I was growing up, and I have to say, I was affected by the emotional content of it. All right. And it's only much later do you ask yourself the question, excuse me, but if for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows, we would have an earth with flowers stacked up 1,000,000 miles high. That's not, it cannot be, that cannot be true. So if someone says, I believe for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows, they have to be metaphorical. That has to be something that I don't believe that, but the underlying truth behind that, I believe, in the sense that for every time something that you may think is not good, some good comes from it. That's the description of it. So you look at this, and if you allow your reason to come over, to dominate as opposed to your emotion, then you understand the metaphor and you can enjoy the song. But if you take it literally, you're not only being stupid, but you're missing the point. You're focusing on the literal and you're missing the underlying truth.
Now, let me
give you the second one first, because these two kind of go together. But the second one, when I think of the term I believe, is one that I said 1,000,000 times also. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth and of all things visible and invisible. I won't read the whole thing because you know that. You've heard it many, many times. Okay, the Apostles' Creed. It was based on the Nicene Creed. And what it was an attempt to codify the Christian belief, because there were all sorts of people who were taking the early church. This was around in the 4th century. There were people who were taking the church in different directions. And so the Nicene Council wanted to say, well, let's put down in paper what we believe. And what they wrote down, in addition to that statement, I don't know if you can see this or not, but you'll see it on the, I can't do that, on the document. Of all the text in here, the only thing that is observable is I believe in Jesus. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried. The rest of it is conjecture based on supposition. It's in predisposition. That he is God from God, light from light. Through him all things were made. All this stuff was an attempt to put down things that could not be observed, that you were dictating to people that you should believe this. So some of our beliefs come from things that people have asserted to us when we're at our most vulnerable state, when we're children and when we're, in times of stress and, grief and other things. We're told things to believe because, at a time when you don't know what to believe, you're going to grasp at anything. You don't know, you're floating in space, you don't know which end is up, and you see something, you're going to grab it because
you're talking about the formation of identity.
Exactly. So the process of okay, I accept this code, whatever it might be, then I now rely upon that. And if I'm holding on to the life preserver, I'm not going to let go of it and hope that I get another one. You know, this is my belief, and I'm going to hold on to that because that's all I got. You know, so I think there's a dimension to this that is not rational.
Well, this is interesting because I'm able to explore the idea, like the Jesus example is really interesting. And I'm able to explore it because I can be slightly more dispassionate about it.
Yeah.
I have not tied my identity to the necessity of Jesus being real or the Son of God. So if someone questions that, it doesn't bother me. You know, and I was always of the, again, from the earlier story, Jesus doesn't need to be real. Like, he shouldn't need to be real to get the point. And if you need him to be real, you've missed the point.
Yeah.
And even amongst my own friends, when we talk about this stuff, we don't talk about it often, they kind of get the concept that God is a concept, you know, but Jesus was a real guy back then, or whatever. And I'm telling them, like, well, there's new studies that the person Jesus never existed in the first place.
Yeah.
And there's lots of reasons. And the thing I never hear the anthropologists and those people that talk about that stuff that I learn from, and it seems to make sense, is he doesn't need to be.
Right.
He doesn't need to be real.
His truth is not dependent upon his existence.
Right. And so this comes back to, I just thought of this question, so I'm going to fumble through it. Is there a difference between how does that come to play in actuality? So if I, through dispassionate, rational thinking, when I'm separated from any emergency or whatever, and I come to the conclusion that there's a truth in that and it doesn't need to be real to be a truth, is there a difference between that kind of identity of mine, whatever anchor that is, when that's tested, or do I revert back to an emotional identity? Or is my identity through rational means as strong as my identity through emotional means? Do I throw one out the window whenever I choose? Is one's better or another? You know, when shit hits the fan, what happens to your rational identity, I guess, is a better question.
Something you're saying kind of triggered something for me, and I want to deal with the rational identity.
Mm-hmm.
But I think rational identity is also, you can call it maturity. And one of my criticisms of the Catholic Church has been that I consider most of the things that the church teaches to have an underlying truth that I can accept. Mm-hmm. You know, I think it's good to treat people fairly and with love, and to not hurt people, and to not kill people, and to not steal and cheat. And, you know, they have an underlying truth. But here's what happens. You teach a story, and in terms of Jesus, while I think I tend to think that he was real because of evidence I have, I'm open to the idea that he never was. Maybe he was an amalgam of many people. You know, who knows what it was? But the story, if you accept the story at face value, there was a man who lived in Palestine and got in trouble with the Romans because the Jews fucked him over, and he got killed. And I can accept that part, and I tend to believe there's some truth beyond that. Okay, well, what's happened to the story is that he did some things. Okay, he went to a wedding in Cana with his mom, and his mom was a friend of the bride and the groom, and they didn't plan well. They ran out of wine. So his mom says, "Hey, son, do something about this. I don't have any wine." Now, what's he supposed to do?
Magic.
He can't, you know, just go out and buy wine for him. He can't do that. So what he does is very clever. He tells his friends, look, you see this glass of water? It's not water. This is the best wine I ever had. Don't you think it's the best wine you ever? Oh yeah, I think it's the best wine too. And so they all raved about the wine to make the bride and groom feel good and not be embarrassed. And everybody went along with it. And that was the miracle.
Oh, nice. I like that.
That's enough of the miracle. Okay. He doesn't have to change water into wine. He doesn't have to walk on the water or walk on the wine or any of those things. He doesn't have to do that. It's enough that he could accomplish that. He goes out with a group of people out in the country. He's going to give them a talk, and he talks a long time, and they're all hungry, and a lot of them forgot to bring any food. So he says, well, don't worry. Take these baskets over here. Here's a couple of fish, a couple of loaves of bread. Pass it around. Let everybody share. Take what you need.
Right.
So the basket comes around to me, and I look at the crowd, and I say, well, I've got enough. Let me put a little more bread in there.
Right.
Or let me take one of my fish and put it in there. And they pass it around. By the time it comes back, it's overflowing. That was a miracle. It doesn't need to be magic to be a miracle. It's enough that you make that happen. Now, for me, that meaning gives substance to the Christ story. That's a believable story. If you tell me that he went poof and turned to, one loaf of bread into 20, I don't believe you. I don't believe that. I can't believe that. Right. It's not necessary for me to believe it, and I can't believe it. But for many people, they're told the story, and they say, well, gee, wow, that's it. He did it. And if you don't believe it, then you're an infidel. That you have to believe that he did this magic trick.
I like the phrase, you can't argue with God. Once you bring the infallible, all-knowable everything, I can't argue against that.
Right. Well, what you were saying about that impediment to your logic, I forgot how you phrased it, but it really is an immaturity that for the immature mind, Santa Claus brings Christmas presents, comes down the chimney, does all that shit. For the mature mind, once a year, we take time to give gifts to people we love. And Santa Claus represents that time when we say, hey, I've been thinking about you. Here, have this thing that I think you'll like. Well, that's the miracle of Christmas. It's not, some elf dropping down a chimney. And if you believe in the elf dropping down the chimney as a child, that's excusable. As an adult, that's really insane. You can't accept that. So there has to be, and again, my criticism of the Catholic Church is that they allow childish behavior to continue, childish thought to continue. They even contradict themselves, because St. Paul says, when I was a child, I thought like a child and acted like a child and had things. When I became a man, I put away those childish things. And it's like, okay, you have to be open to the idea of the underlying truth that's represented by the mythology and represented by the tale.
That's my same critique of capitalists, if they allow and encourage childish behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I articulate manipulation.
Yeah.
Now, what was my one question? It was about, I can realize now with all the sensationalism and drive to be irrational, there are a lot of forces acting upon us that make even me irrational from time to time. Was that always the case? Was there a before where we weren't that way? Like, take that out. Like, before cable news, were we irrational the same way we are now? Or, was it better or worse, or is it just different? Like,
I think there was the same amount of irrational, underpinning, but we only had certain filters, and those filters were questions. You only had 3 networks. So, if one of them said something crazy, the other 2 reported on them and they got a bad. So they were kept in tow. There was an accountability among the sources. And what's happened now is that there's so many sources, there's not enough time for you to listen to the people you disagree with.
Right.
You don't have time to watch One America News all day to hear the things they're saying. You know, you try to keep informed. You go for your trusted sources, not the ones you don't trust.